In the remote mountain village of Hikaru, Japan, there was an ancient custom observed every autumn during the Festival of Lanterns. The villagers believed that lighting lanterns and placing them along the pathways would guide the spirits of their ancestors back to the village for one night. Yuki, a young woman who had recently moved to Hikaru from Tokyo, was fascinated by the old traditions. She was staying with her grandmother, Obaasan, who was well versed in the village's customs. Despite Obaasan's warnings to always show respect for the spirits, Yuki was skeptical of such superstitions. On the night of the festival, Yuki decided to explore the village alone. Eager to capture the beauty of the lantern-lit paths on her camera, she wandered further and further away from the main festivities, drawn to the eerie, silent beauty of the forest paths. As she reached a secluded part of the forest, she noticed an old, dilapidated shrine she hadn't seen before. Intrigued, Yuki approached the shrine. There was a lone, unlit lantern hanging from its eaves. Remembering her grandmother's stories, she decided to light it, thinking it would make a beautiful photograph. She struck a match and lit the lantern. The warm glow illuminated the shrine, revealing faded carvings and old offerings. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in. Yuki felt a chill run down her spine. She heard soft whispers and the rustling of leaves, as if someone, or something, was moving through the forest. Panicking, she decided to head back to the village, but the fog had become so dense that she could barely see the path. As she stumbled through the mist, Yuki noticed a figure ahead, holding a lantern. Relieved, she called out,
"Hello, can you help me find my way back?"
The figure turned, revealing an old woman with an eerie, translucent appearance. Yuki's blood ran cold as she realized she was looking at a ghost. The spirit smiled kindly and motioned for her to follow. Too scared to refuse, Yuki followed the ghostly figure through the forest. They walked for what seemed like hours until the fog began to lift and Yuki saw the familiar lights of the village ahead.
"Thank you,"
Yuki whispered, but the spirit had vanished. Breathless, Yuki ran back to her grandmother's house and told Obaasan what had happened. Her grandmother listened intently, her face growing pale.
"You lit the lantern at the old shrine?"
Obaasan asked.
"That shrine is for spirits who have no family to remember them. By lighting the lantern, you called one of them to guide you."
Yuki felt a pang of guilt, but she was also relieved to be safe. She decided to honor the spirit who had helped her by visiting the shrine the next day to leave an offering. The following morning, Yuki returned to the shrine with flowers and food. As she placed the offerings, she noticed something strange on the ground near the shrine. It was an old, faded photograph. Picking it up, Yuki gasped. The photograph was of her grandmother as a young woman, standing next to the very same shrine. Confused, Yuki hurried back to Obaasan and showed her the photograph. Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears.
"That is my mother,"
Obaasan said, her voice trembling.
"She died when I was very young, and I placed this photograph at the shrine in her memory. I never knew what happened to it."
Yuki realized the ghost who had guided her was her great-grandmother, the spirit who had no family to remember her until now. Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged her grandmother, vowing to honor their ancestors and never forget the power of the spirits that watched over them. But that night, Yuki was awakened by a strange sound. She heard the familiar rustling and whispers she had heard in the forest. The air in her room grew cold, and she saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was the same ghostly woman, but her kindly smile had twisted into a sinister grin. "You should not have lit the lantern," the spirit hissed. "Now you have awakened the others." Yuki tried to scream, but no sound came out. The spirit reached out with icy fingers, and Yuki felt a crushing weight on her chest. The room spun around her, and she was plunged into darkness. The next morning, Obaasan found Yuki lying motionless in her bed, her face frozen in an expression of terror. The villagers whispered that the spirits had taken their revenge on Yuki for disturbing their peace. From that day on, the villagers made sure to double their offerings and never again strayed from the old customs, fearing the wrath of the restless spirits that still lingered in the shadows of Hikaru Village.